So I first ask the panelists to join me here on the stage. So first of all, Franz Fayot, Minister of Economy, please sit in the middle. Second, Anne Calteux, Head of the Representation of the European Commission here in Luxembourg, maybe in the middle as well. Jana Meisser, Head of Special Projects, Long Products from ArcelorMittal. Christophe, Hansen, Member of the European Parliament. Christophe, Georges Rassel, Vice Chairman of FEDIL and Member of Paul Wirth's Board of Directors. As he's tall, he will take the edge, not to cover the screen. And finally, Pierre Laffont, Director EU Affairs at France Industrie. Before starting the panel, we first have a look at the video clip that shows you a bit the topics that we want to tackle. So please start the video. Right, yeah, we should first have watched the video and then ask the panelists, but anyway. So the title is Industrial Policy, Bridging Ambition and Execution. You saw some of the buzzwords, some of the topics that are really high on the agenda of our industry. And we want to start our panel with a first round where, let's say, every participant has some 3 minutes for a first statement. And I would start with the minister. Yeah, the title, Industrial Policy, Bridging Ambition and Execution. From your point of view and as regards Luxembourg, what are the ambitions? You are a major player of that policy. Do you have the impression that you managed to bridge that ambition towards the execution? And what remains maybe to be done to do it maybe better, because we also saw some failures in that policy. So the floor is here for a first round of 3 minutes.
Thank you, René, and yes, good afternoon to everybody. I think the first ambition of my mandate as a minister was really to manage a crisis. When I came in early 2020, it was just before the pandemic broke out. So I think it started with crisis management, and crisis management was really something that stayed right until the end, right until now. It was one crisis after the other, a crisis of lockdown that was never, I think, seen before in the economy, and then followed by a crisis of supply chains, a crisis of energy, which was exacerbated by, of course, the terrible war started by the Russians in Ukraine, and of course leading to very high inflation. And we have, I think, in all of that, seen also Europe trying to reposition itself, having to reinvent its energy market. I think I'm saying things that are obvious, but I think this was the first thing that I had to do together with my team at the Ministry of the Economy, together with the rest of the government, and of course with all the partners at the Chamber of Commerce, at all the stakeholders, to stabilize the economy. I think it was an extremely testing time for all businesses, I would say, across the board, from small businesses, of course, also to industry. Nobody was spared by this, and I think so the first thing that we had to do was really to find the necessary instruments to stabilize businesses and to stabilize the economy. Out of this, I think this was really the short-term management that I did throughout my term. It was very important to also, at the same time, take the impulse of the transformation. We are, and you've shown it in this video, we are in a time of transformation. We have a situation in the energy market that was never there before. Luxembourg's industry could always rely on quite cheap energy prices. That has, of course, dramatically changed during the past 2 years. We have also, of course, a geopolitically changed situation. We have a new globalization that is going on. I'm sure we will come back to this topic. And in all of that, of course, businesses have to reinvent themselves. They have to transform themselves, decarbonize themselves, because we have some hard targets when it comes to decarbonization. Europe and Luxembourg needs to get to net zero by 2050. 2050. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up, and that is, of course, a huge challenge. And so I think the challenge was also, out of the management crisis, to get businesses on the train of this transformation. And what makes me confident, and there it's bridging the ambition, is that I see a lot of businesses, and I have visited a lot of them, who are embarking on this journey through investments, through process changes, through embarking on more circular economy processes, and I think that's really the way to go. Europe is a resource-poor region. We are a very developed region, and we need to look for the right industrial niches. When we talk about strategic autonomy, when we talk about reindustrialization, we need to now compose with the hard constraints that we have. We know that we have strategically, we don't master all the supply chains. We know that we are faced with a shortage of talent. We know that we are competing with players in third country markets that are not playing according to the same rules. And we need to find answers to these questions. It's not unique to Luxembourg, but I would say that's really what we need to do. We need to prepare our economy for the challenges of tomorrow, of a decarbonized future. And I think that's what I did, and that's what I think also what the next government will need to continue doing.
Thank you, Minister. And indeed, we will come back to several of the aspects that you mentioned. I come over to Anne. You represent the European Commission here in Luxembourg. But the video mentioned the means suggested by the Green Deal industrial plan. It also mentioned the value chains that we want to promote via the Net Zero Industry Act. This comes several years after the EU increased the ambitions of its climate and energy agenda. And the question we ask ourselves is, had the industry been initially forgotten in that strategy? Adding the industrial dimension, is it an act of conviction, or is it an inevitable reaction after the US produced its Inflation Reduction Act, which indeed put us even more under pressure? Could you a bit elaborate on that one, please?
Yeah, thanks for giving me this opportunity. Because indeed, many people think that now industry comes back to the front, but it has never been really forgotten. Because if you look back to 2019, when President von der Leyen stepped in, her milestone initiative was the Green Deal, adopted in December 2019, but only 3 months later, she adopted a new industrial strategy. And in the Green Deal already, she said that industry, I'm quoting here, industry has a substantial responsibility and plays a crucial role in helping the European Union to meet its targets when it comes to climate neutrality. So there was already this acknowledgement of the importance of industry in the Green Deal in 2019, and only 3 months later she revised the existing industrial strategy to enhance the responsibility of industry and also to give industry more means to bring itself in this really ambitious agenda by putting into place the industry alliances, IPC, EI, really with the aim to bring together the necessary funds to make industry fit for this upcoming challenge. And we have seen now, since 2019, there have been several accelerators making that now we have to invest more and more in industry. First accelerator having been, as Minister Fayot said, the COVID crisis, where we realized, I think in a really brutal way, how fragile the European Union is when it comes to certain supply chains in really critical sectors, and where industry plays a very substantial role. So first accelerator, and then also further to the COVID crisis, the industrial strategy had again been updated, and then we had the war against Ukraine. Obviously, a new realization of how fragile we are. So also there, we need to keep industry in Europe. So also a big wake-up call here, and not lose it off to other third countries. And the third accelerator is then this new geo-economical rivalry which is taking place. And you mentioned the IRA, which is just one example of this new global context we are living in. But it's not only the US, it's also China, it's India, it's Japan, it's Canada. There are many. They are rivals and they are partners as well. So this explains how it came to the new the Net Zero Industry Act, which is not something which we had always forgotten. It's just a sharpening of our ambition, and it's a reinforcement of the role we would like to give European industry to play in this really crucial period we are living right now.
Thank you. Switching over to Pierre, who represents French industry in our panel. 2 weeks ago, when we attended, some of us attended the Rencontre des Entreprises de France organized by MEDEF in Paris, we were reminded that reindustrialization is very high on your government's agenda. We heard it from Minister Le Maire, we heard it from Minister Pannier-Runacher with very clear statements in favor of reindustrialization. What are the key elements of the French reindustrialization plan? And do you think that policymakers in your country manage, maybe better to bridge ambition and the performance? Could you a bit explain the situation from your country, Pierre?
Yeah, thanks very much, René. Thanks for the invitation to FEDIL. France Industrie is very happy to be there today. We represent the very broad industrial scope from the manufacturing to the energy industry. So we think that our testimony today would be interesting for your country. Technically, maybe a bit of a background when it comes to industry. More or less, French industry and Luxembourg industry represent more or less the same share of GDP, around 30%, more or less, what we can say. 40 years ago, it was more around 25. In almost 40 years, France lost half of its workforce. And we have as well a huge issue about supply chain. But for the past years, it's not linked with the political renewal, but it's linked as well with the economic situation. Since 2017, France, investments in industry has been growing. France has been one of the most attractive countries in terms of foreign investment as well for the past 4 years. So this is something which can be tell, and creation of industrial sites are growing, and even sometimes going further, the disappearing industrial sites. What about the current situation? France has a kind of unique way to speak with the government. It's called the National Council for Industry. It's chaired by the French Prime Minister and vice-chaired by the President of France Industry, in which we have sectorial committees working together for the reindustrialization. So we are talking about strategic contracts for each sectors, in which actors from the SMEs to the big companies and the federations are working together in order to find solution for the transition and the decarbonization, as well digitalization, etc. So there is a bridge, an official platform. It's a kind of thing at the EU level. They try to build on this so-called industrial forum, in which the European Commission and member states are represented with other industrial stakeholders. In France, we call it the National Council for Industry. We have as well the Plan France, the France Relance and France 2030, in which investment for industry have been done. We have as well dialogues with the states concerning energy prices, and concerning as well some important projects. When it comes to critical raw material, a few months ago was creating a new directorate in France specialized in this topic. So little by little, the government is pushing to facilitate and builds on this dialogue. But obviously we have the same issues compared to the Luxembourgish industry when it comes to investment, when it comes to burden. We'll speak about it later, certainly. And there is sometimes a gap between the political ambition and the real day-to-day political and economical commitment. So this is more or less where we stand in France after the declarations of the minister.
Thank you. So an integrated approach, if I understand well. Jana, I think we heard that energy, affordable, reliable energy supplies is the main lever for industrial policy, for sure. You represent an energy-intensive industry. You rely on electricity, huge amounts of electricity, to decarbonize your industries in Europe. How do you see the situation in the different European countries, and what are your expectations for Luxembourg as regards the availability, the reliability of energy, especially in the framework of decarbonization?
Thank you, René. The energy crisis was purely an European crisis. We are operating 2 electric arc furnaces here in Belval and in Differdange. We're consuming per year maybe 1.3 terawatt hours of electrical energy. This is a huge amount. We are connected via a grid to Belgium and to France. So we procure our energy at the Bourse. During the crisis, we observed in France the highest energy prices, or at least higher than Belgium and Germany, for instance. But France capped the electricity price for the industry in a way that they reserved 100 terawatt hours for their heavy industry to a very affordable price of 42 euros, I think, per megawatt hour. It's a little bit like the ongoing discussions in Germany, where Economy Minister Habeck also wants to plan the so-called Industriestrom, which is also capped at a certain price level of around 30 euros per megawatt hour. In Luxembourg, we don't have this cap, but we could ask for subsidies afterwards. What we need, also what are the expectations? It's in fact that we should harmonize the energy prices at a EU level. This is a very important factor, that we are not creating so big gaps in between the countries. And also second, which is also raising our energy prices, is the contribution of the indirect CO2 via the ETS system. The new emission trading system phase, they will start in 2026 for the next 10 years. And this could be also a burden because it foresees the smooth out of the free allocations. And I hope that we are, as an industry, are able to react on this with our process of decarbonization at the same pace. It is not always depending on us. So yeah, these are the expectations. And then I found very interesting the recent statement from Pierre from Belgium, who stated, so why all this protectionism? If the European industry disappears, so what? We can also buy 3 times cheaper steel from Taiwan. So personally, I think this completely undermines our green agenda. And then it's also, if the oil players are not subject of the same rules, you need adjustments. Yeah. The question we have to ask us is, do we want to keep industry in Europe or not? So for me, it's sure our answer is yes. Also, I represent the steel industry. Our answer says we want to keep. And it's because it's strategic.
Thanks, Jana. Christophe? Gave us an overview of the European action aiming at aligning industrial, energy and environmental policies, but we just heard from Jana that there are huge discrepancies between the action that several member states are taking. And I also had a discussion with Commissioner Schmidt yesterday on that, and I think more and more people believe that if there's not a European answer to the challenge, there is a risk of breaking up the internal market because member states will look for their own way. So that would be my first part of the question. Do you see that risk as well? Then you are spokesperson of your group for international trade in the European Parliament. Where do you see the main challenges for European industries? Is strategic autonomy, maybe protecting these basic industries, an answer? How far should openness go? How far should protection go? Also knowing that if basic industries are disappearing, it doesn't stop at the basic industries. There are value chains behind, and there's then a real risk of deindustrialization. So how would you react to these two elements, internal market and the international dimension?
Yes, thank you very much, René. And on your first question, on the potential fragmentation of the internal market, I think there is a serious threat. We see now that, for example, France is granting better energy prices to their home industry than we can ever afford here, for example, in Luxembourg. So there is the potential. We have as well a flexibilization that we see on the state aid rules, where, of course, bigger member states have way more power as well to fire their industry, and this creates another potential unfair competition inside the European Union. So we have to be very, very careful. But on the other side, also we see that sometimes the reaction from the European side, because the European Union is not perfect, and our legislative process is the one it is. So sometimes the answers are coming too late, and we can't react as fast as we should do to react, for example, on situations where we see now the IRA in the United States. We need to have quicker responses very clearly on that. Now for this point on the energy, I think it's very important that we prolong the exemptions to co-finance the energy prices in order that at least our industry survives the next few years. And we had, on your invitation, 5 of the 6 members of the European Parliament visited some companies in Wils last Friday, and there we met with Circuit, and they have 3 times bigger energy prices than their competitors. They are producing copper foil, which is afterwards used to produce semiconductors. Under the Net Zero Industry Act as well, we want now to have more of this critical industry as well in the European Union. Producing microchips is very difficult, and it's not that easy to relocate it, so we need a whole ecosystem of different components that will be delivered there. But if we would lose now one of those critical ones, that would of course throw us some years back in time again, and that needs to be avoided. So I think that is maybe the answer to your first question. Then on the second one, well, you mentioned the strategic autonomy. The European Commission presented it as the open strategic autonomy, and I think sometimes we forget a little bit about this openness, because we are, let's say, quite small when compared to a global economic system. We are very poor in resources as well in the European Union, so we are really heavily dependent as well, for example, to drive the technology to get the net zero emissions by 2050. So we need input of resources that are not cannot be found, or at least not be found in a sufficient quantity in the European Union. So that is, I think, the openness is our strength, and we need it to achieve our targets. And then the second point I saw on your charts as well, the dynamics globally are changing quite significantly as well, because if you look over the last 15 years, and those are figures from the Wall Street Journal, the US economy has expanded by 82%. At the same time, the Eurozone economy has expanded by only 6%. So there is a growing gap that we need to fill in some way. And I think there sometimes, and we come to that discussion maybe later, our European regulations that we set up are as well, they are well meant, of course, but they are driving the loss of competitiveness at international level, as well on subsidies or helps that we grant to our industry. We are lagging behind. The IRA foresees over 300 billion. Now our support in the European Union is around 10 billion that we will grant over the next years, if the Council agrees on the figures, of course. And this is, of course, 30 times less. And one of my friends compared this entering a Formula One race with a Fiat 500. Of course, you will have less chances to succeed if you do so. So I think that is very important. And as well, on the Green Deal, maybe, which is the guiding principle as well, sometimes I have the impression the biggest supporters of the Green Deal are as well the ones that are avoiding or trying to avoid the solutions to it. So we need our openness, we need as well free trade agreements, but I think we come to that later on.
Thank you, Georges. You're the last panelist for the first round. Your company is a European-based technology supply acting worldwide. For sure, the overarching goal of environmental and energy transition, but then also the digital transition entail opportunities for your industries, for technology providers. At the same time, it seems that from a geo-economic point of view, the cards are being reshuffled. both for supply chains but also for market access. We saw it recently with the BRICS meeting. The cards seem to be reshuffled. How do you rate this development from your point of view?
Thank you, René. Well, as you're speaking of reshuffling, just give me 10 seconds to go back to the past in order to explain what will be the future. So looking in the past, both Parverd and now full member of the SMS group, we are more than 150 years in technology, starting with huge manufacturing possibilities here in Luxembourg, in Europe basically, but then over the years developing more and more to an, I would call it, pure technology company with very reduced manufacturing facilities. And especially here in Luxembourg, we have seen since more than 20 years now that the development mainly of the labor costs are too high to be able to continue to manufacture here in Luxembourg. So our manufacturing, our engineering, let's say, was mainly then supported by manufacturing which we took from outside Luxembourg, also outside Europe, over the past decades. And by doing this, we were quite successful and we were becoming market leaders in many areas of the world. And I know that many here of the companies represented by FEDIL are also hidden champions, or even not hidden, but champions, but mainly due to their export facilities they have. And they're looking now forward, it becomes definitely more complicated. Our labor costs continuing to increase compared to others. We heard about the energy costs from our big producers here in Luxembourg, which do not have the capped prices which we have in the other countries, neighboring countries. But then comes on top what also Christophe was saying, the geopolitical, let's say, impacts which makes, and we should maybe not call it protectionist, let's say, elements, but it is definitely resulting in such. And this started years ago when I see in India, and some time ago in India it was meant make in India. That was a must. If we want to be successful in India, it was following the Make in India philosophy. And Make in India means we have relocated already at that time for our Indian market, our activities to India. Now we have the ERA, which is definitely giving the incentives to have, let's say, investments in the US, but which is also then, let's say, as a consequence, asking the companies to relocate their whole activities to the US. And this is what we definitely see in our company, this regionalization, which will allow us to continue to be competitive in these continents, but will definitely not allow us to generate workload here in Europe. And therefore we as a group, we have also started since a couple of years to go, like Minister Fayot said also, we have to go into niches where others are not yet. Going, for example, into hydrogen or going into the e-fuels. And this is now where we are trying to do, where we know that we are still not behind the others. But it's a matter really of not becoming behind the others because we are too slow in all our procedures, in all our ways of doing, which are meant good, but which definitely are not in favor for the time being for the industry located in Europe and in Luxembourg.
Thank you. So after this first round, maybe then more open questions, and don't hesitate to react to the answer given by other panelists to make it a bit more dynamic. So I come back to Minister Fayot. The keyword openness has been mentioned. It's one of the 3 values of our nation branding. We host many international investors. We know that sourcing comes from outside and we need to access external markets. Now we see that several recent initiatives, national or mainly also European, are a bit more restrictive as regards openness. We saw the FDI control recent legislation. You brought in a bill for merger control, foreign subsidies, sustainable supply chains, again, only a plan at European level, border adjustment. And I think I don't want now to talk about the fact if this is relevant or not, the legislation, but just to ask you the question, do you think we are moving away from openness with these many recent initiatives? Do you think it's the start of a movement of deglobalization? And what could be maybe a way in the middle that we could work with, especially as an open economy that relies on this principle and trade with and economic relations with our partners?
I think there is no other country on earth that is more open than Luxembourg. It's firmly in our DNA. We are a small, very open country, and that really makes our strength. So I'm certainly not of the opinion that we are moving away from that. However, we are in a global movement. We are, and we have discussed this in the first round. We are in a changed geopolitical context. We are, I think, in a changed globalization. The WTO just published its annual report under the theme reglobalization. I think that's probably too much of wishful thinking. I think there is a form of reinvented globalization which involves more protectionism. We have discussed the IRA, we have discussed the tensions between China and the US, and Europe is caught in the middle of that, and it comes up with the policies that you mentioned, René, FDI, the subsidiaries from third countries. So I think that's part of a new reality that we live in, and in which Luxembourg must also find its position and its response. So I think we are still an extremely open country, but we are caught in this movement. And I think when you talk about what we should do and finding this middle way is to remain extremely open and also to remain very pragmatic, but to learn from what has happened over the past years. I think we have all learned the lesson the hard way with what has happened with Russia, on which we were over-dependent with the energy. We have all seen that we are trying to reindustrialize Europe partly with supply chains that we don't control. And so I think that's what we need to find responses to. How are we going to do that? And I think some of the European policies that have been formulated over the past years, including the Net Zero Industrial Act, including the IPCEIs on hydrogen, on semiconductors, on batteries, trying to reindustrialize Europe in these crucial areas. Health, of course, is another area with the pandemic, are important efforts. But I think we cannot move away from this globalization, but we have to realize that it has changed. Trade has changed. I think we have seen, even after the financial crisis of 2008, seen a decrease in global trade. So it's, I think, normalizing at a certain level. And we need to know that we have to probably not deglobalize, but de-risk our activities. We have to find supply chains that are more resilient. And I think the term of friendshoring comes to mind. You are less vulnerable if you trade with countries and regions that share some of the same values than you, but also to try and source, I think, more locally or regionally, and that's you always come back to the idea of circular economy. We are a developed region, and we need to also invent industrial processes of better introducing the material, the resources that we have in our industrial process to put it back into the circuit. I think that's, for me, that's the way to go. That's the future, and I think that's also really I would say the main card that Europe can play in the future. We are doing it with steel. We have been doing that since the 1990s. Steel produced in Luxembourg is a circular product. It is already green steel to a certain extent, if you like. And I think that's we need to do that in many other areas.
Jana, you
But
want to
yeah, but if I saw recently diagrams from Eurofair, which were publishing the export and the import figures of steel and finished goods from last year. It was only the first 8 months, I think, from 2022. And that was showing clearly that export decreased by 17% or something like this, and the import increased. So that means EU, it was for steel and steel products, I'm just talking about this. That means EU has gone during the last years, or yeah, from a net exporter to a net importer. So it's not the same tendency we aim to strengthen. So we should do much more, because our main products in Luxembourg, the sheet piles and the big beams, from the heavy beams from the FEDIL plant, they are now also indirectly due to this ETS, we have a competitive disadvantage for the moment.
I think also maybe we come back to the question later on about public markets, because it's well to say it's circular, etc. Then it's all we also need to buy the product. But I suggest we come back to that part later on. Christophe, you said that the Green Deal, and indeed it suggests new trade agreements to access these critical raw materials. Now, do you think, and again I said beforehand, that the BRICS countries also start to become a bit more self-confident? They are reluctant, and they openly say they are reluctant to accept our values and standards. In the same time, we want our imports to be in line with these values and standards. So how can we merge these two points, especially when you see the map of the potential sourcing of these critical raw materials, when you see where they are located? I think, Minister, we were in a panel with a representative of the European Commission. You see a chart with all the critical raw materials for the energy transition, and there's a huge red part, and red was China alone, and the third and the sixth and etc. again were not were rather BRIC countries or of that area. So, Christophe, how do you think we can merge this, the access, the trade agreements, and then the nevertheless more important self-confidence of emerging economies that are not necessarily sharing our ways of doing?
Yes, I definitely share your point of view that we are not in the same situation anymore. We see exactly that those countries have their own way. I was sitting next to Georges at the lunch, and we were discussing about the steel industry, that over 30 years we were exporting our technology to China, but now they have the technology and they are flooding our markets with the product that we learn them to do in the end. And then we see as well on the European continent, when you see, for example, the Chinese strategy has as well significantly changed. They went from a merger acquisition strategy, moved to the greenfield investments that has now in 2022, the greenfield investments were at 57%. So they have overgrown the merger and acquisition strategy. So they have changed their model as well. We have a problem that we are very slow in developing and deploying our agreements. For example, the Mercosur agreement. We know exactly, we gave a mandate, the European Council gave a mandate to negotiate this agreement some 20 years ago. Then after 18 years, we finally signed that agreement, but we still haven't ratified it. Now 5 years after it has been signed, and that is a problem. And we keep on changing the conditions behind. We have meanwhile the deforestation regulation, where I was the rapporteur, which doesn't please at all countries like Brazil, for example, but nonetheless, it's as well important for us and for our civil society to be able to support the agreement. agreements. But we are changing the rules permanently. Now we will be talking maybe later as well about the corporate sustainability due diligence legislation. All those rules come behind and they don't know how to face them. So maybe we need to be very proactive as well to help them there to cope with this new administrative burden. Firstly, because there are other clients, way more, let's say, wealthy clients in the world that don't ask at all those requirements and this additional burden. So we need to be aware of this, that we are slowly moving from a rule maker, we used to be the rule maker, to a rule taker. This is a reality. We need to face that. So I think it is very important that we see, because Lula, when he comes to Europe, he goes back to negotiate, he goes back to Brazil, and he has some more administrative burden or other new targets to achieve. He goes to China and he comes back with billions of contracts for his country. So what is easier for him in the end? That is something we need to acknowledge. We don't set the pace anymore, and we need to adapt it. We need as well, I think that is very important, we have cut ourselves off, for example, from the Russian raw materials, and I think we did rightly so, but now we need to find alternatives. The Chinese are very difficult to access because they want to produce their batteries, for example, themselves. So where do they lie? Well, Australia, Mercosur are, I think, low-hanging fruits. Franz was talking about friendshoring and about like-minded partners. I think those are culturally very like-minded, and I think it's even maybe the only ones remaining if we see the global board. So I think we really need to be bold finally, and to show as well to those countries that we are there. For Latin America, for example, we had now recently this CELAC summit, and which was the first one in 7 or 8 years. I think that is as well something we have to be more pushy and let's say really care about those relations. Maybe it has been a little bit forgotten over the pandemic, but we need to show them as well in Latin America and other parts of the world that we are there and that we are able to move finally, because I have the impression that to be for open trade has become a shame word, and this is definitely not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Right, I think this is the more political part and really challenging if we see the expectations and the possibilities, and maybe a need to become a bit more humble, whatever it means. From the more political, from the more practical point of view, maybe the industry representatives could tell us, do you see new trends affecting international relations? So apart from the purely political discussion, what are your experiences in the recent years in that area? Georges or Jana, whoever wants to, or Pierre, yeah, what? Georges?
The recent trends, yeah, for sure, we discussed already about it, and a lot is influenced by the regulations which are set in place or which risk to be set in place in the future. It's very clear when we speak about supply chain controls, it's not making our lives easier. And as I mentioned before, projects on other continents are preferably already executed on other continents. And on the other hand, the projects here in Europe, in order to be competitive, you have to find your sources at competitive prices. And then all the efforts to comply with the rules are definitely requiring a lot of additional efforts and additional manpower even to do this. And we see now more recently even additional trends linked to the whole regulations, let's say also ESG based regulations when it comes to financing. We have been in the past very successful in exporting our technologies to BRICS countries. And the BRICS countries, they were using financing from Europe because the banks were interested to do it, and the banks got the support or the coverage by our ECA agencies. Now, due to
ODL,
for example, Euler Hermes in Germany and such and so on. And now at least discussions are ongoing that when it comes to a project which still somehow involves carbon emissions, and there is no doubt there will be blast furnaces or whatever, steel industry, other industries being built in countries like India, which has set the goal of the net zero to 2070 and not 2045, then these projects, the financing will be very difficult from Europe. Hence, also the suppliers will not come from Europe, but will then come probably also from China. So these risks, I don't know if everybody is making the whole tour 360, what it will really mean for the industry in Luxembourg and in Europe. Huh?
Pierre?
Maybe, thank you. Just to carry on what you just said, on regulation, maybe a small word on energy as well in the decarbonization. Regulation is one of the highest topics for the French industry, I think for the whole European industry as well. Let me be clear, we don't put at question the legitimacy of the objectives. We have to repeat it, I think, as industrialists. We share the objective of decarbonization. We share it because we know that we can do it and that we want to do it. It's the way they are implemented. And the problem, it's the numerous, several, and very high level of regulations, regulatory framework. You talk about ESG, CSRD is one of them, but let's speak about CBAM coming up. Let's speak about taxonomy. Let's speak about other topics in which we have this due diligence, not yet voted, but we have it on the plate. Again, it's not questioning the legitimacy of this, but it's just questioning the way it is implemented. And I just want to make a point on this. The European Commission said, and we welcome it on the principle, that they will decrease by 25% the level of regulatory constraint, whatever we call it, with a proposal by the end of the year. But do we speak about 25% of the whole administrative task, meaning seen from the administration, or the 25% of the cost for compliance for the company? We don't speak about the same thing. Costs for compliance for ESG are now coming up, and some figures are coming up. It's a huge investment for them, and it's very important as well to comply with it. But what about level playing field? Once we have it implemented, what do the others do? So that's why from France Industrie side, we push a very burning issue called the competitiveness check, contrôle de compétitivité. So it's on the agenda of the Council of Industry Ministers for the end of the month, and as well seems to be as well for the European Council at the end of October. We welcome it. We want it to be very wide. Any legislation before being proposed and applied after trilogues has to be checked with some criteria, and not only we speak about this is European decision making, but not only at the very beginning choosing one scenario, we have a competitiveness proofing in the decision making process, but we want it to be very applied, because the problem is that the legislation in the end, which comes from a human dialogue and a human negotiation at the end, has an impact in economy. And if we do not have it, we will have an issue. Maybe we can speak about energy later, but decarbonization is also something. In Europe, we still impose constraint. In the US, we kind of incentivize. And this is two different ways to handle industrial policies. And fine, when it comes to standards. But now soft law, soft power, whatever we call it, has changed. European soft law is no more the rule on Earth. And what we see at what had the IRA and in the US, investments are being made very quickly. When it takes 3 hours for an industry in the US to fill it a form and get it confirmed by the administration in 3 days, in Europe, when it comes to IPK or IPCA, it takes 2-3 years. And investments are, just fleeing away. So this is as well something.
Yeah, I think this brings us to the simplification, the red tape issue that you also saw in the clip. And first, maybe a question to Anne, because reducing red tape is part of the EU Commission's Green Deal industrial plan to boost innovative industrial investments, but it's not by far not the first try to do it. Maybe not all the means are in the hand of the Commission, or surely are not in the hands of the Commission. But and then I would also take the politicians on board. Don't we need to go further and really fix objectives of simplifications that have to be reached as the minus 50 in CO2 have to be reached, or just saying if half of the parliamentary work would be dedicated to finding ways of simplification, to withdrawing maybe legislation that has simply become too much, maybe not necessary anymore, that can be merged, because the intentions, and we saw it, are not enough. So maybe first on the Commission's intentions and the means, and then I would really also like to hear our two policymakers, how they see it, putting more pressure on policymakers to deliver on that one.
Yes, you said it. It's a joint effort, really, and better regulation, or cutting red tape, call it what you like, is an objective which dates back even to 2002, so more than 20 years within the Commission. So it's really a long-standing priority, but it remains a continuous effort, because the minus 25 reduction objectives dates back to 2007. So it's really something which is there, it has been there for a long time, and the Commission has always been very clear on that. The Commission would like to push this as regards its own regulation, because we need a strong regulatory framework, but it doesn't have to be too burdensome for member states. But at the same time, member states also have to see that when they take new decisions, they also have to see to it that there is not too much burden incumbent on, for instance, industry or the stakeholders concerned by the legislation. So we have, since 2002, as I said, the Better Regulation Program. We had the high-level working group on administrative burden, and it's about administrative burden, not about administrative costs. We have the REFIT program, which is still running today, and every time the Commission presents its new Commission work program, we have this evaluation at the end, how many new regulations or directives have been adopted, how many have been abolished. Obviously, in the last years, as we had to put forward many new initiatives to address the different challenges we're facing, there have been many new initiatives, that's true, and much less abolitions of existing regulations. But now we have come to a new moment, and tomorrow there will be the speech of Ursula von der Leyen on the state of the European Union, a really important political moment. We are all looking forward to hearing what she's saying, what she's announcing. But it could well be that she will say, now for the years to come, let's deliver on what we have on the table. Let's not adopt too many new initiatives. It's possible that she will go in that direction, but let's see tomorrow. Because it's true, we have to give all the stakeholders the chance to implement what's on the table. That is very important. And since Ursula von der Leyen took office, she always said, I would like to put forward legislation which is efficient, which makes our lives easier, the lives of citizens and of companies, of businesses. So let's focus on legislation which is easy to implement, easy to apply, easy to enforce. And there are many solutions which the Commission pushes forward to enable member states to accompany the Commission on that path, because it's difficult. We have a huge framework also for businesses which they have to comply with, but it has been adopted to help companies find their path through the whole acquis legislative. We know it's difficult, but we don't want to renounce. We don't want to give up on our identity, and that is why we don't want to give up on due diligence, for instance, because it's part of our European identity. Even if other parts of the world don't go in that direction, we hope that by means of instruments like the CBAM, we will in the end convince them to adopt the same standards. Also, by way of global gateway, we hope that we will finally impose our standards in countries, third countries, which are perhaps not there where we are today, but we hope to bring them where we are today. So it's really a joint collective effort, and clearly the months which still remain until the end of the current Commission mandate will show us how much we can still deliver, how much is possible without too much burden. And definitely, I think we have to focus on implementation and enforcement in the months and years to come if we would like to address the current crises and the upcoming ones in a serene way.
Thank you. So you also mentioned again the international dimension, but coming back to red tape. So I again go back to the politicians. I will not leave this one out. So yeah, how much pressure should politicians accept to deliver on simplification, on reduction of red tape, and maybe, as I said, legislation that maybe we don't need anymore? And I would add another dimension. Is it still possible to accept that we have legislation that is not digitized by design, which would at least allow to automate, digitize the management of these legislation? So I don't know who wants to start.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I think our biggest asset in Luxembourg, as a small open country, is the single market, is a well-functioning single market. And at every Council of Ministers, of Competitiveness Ministers, I stress this, and we know that it's not always working perfectly. There are impediments, there are obstacles to the single market. There are sometimes level playing fields that are not there. Energy was mentioned. That was a huge issue, remains a big issue, which we need to solve. So I think we will not achieve all these things, all this innovation without a functioning single market, because that's also the fundament for innovation within Europe, for well-functioning of IPSAs, where Luxembourgish businesses need to be able to participate for innovation. This can only happen in a well-functioning single market. And I agree with Calteux that these values that we put forth in all these new regulations, be it the corporate sustainability due diligence, be it the decarbonization efforts, I think are really quite essential, and I think are also important for the future and for the competitiveness of European industry. We should not, I think, antagonize the one with the other. I think the future is towards green production, and I think everybody in the room agrees with that. I know that all the businesses and all the Luxembourgish industrialists are on the way there, and we need to give the means to our businesses to achieve this transformation. So we need to do this within a functioning single market, but which we also protect towards third countries. And that's where instruments, where the CBAM come in, instruments whereby we also export our values, and we also do that partly through these trade agreements, which have European values in them, and we need to be more efficient to get these through. I think also on red tape, of course I agree, René. I think we should not have regulation that is not needed. I'm not a fan of the one in, one out idea, because sometimes when you repeal one piece of regulation, there will be two instead, which can be a little bit more effective. So I don't think this one in, one out rule should be a mantra. But I think that obviously on regulation and on red tape, we need to be faster, we need to be more efficient, we need to cut red tape. We have done that in the context of the Net Zero Industrial Act, where for these priority renewable energy technologies, clean tech, we are prioritizing that. Of course, we also need to do it on a national level. We have procedures that take too long, that are unpredictable, that are always seeming to restart when the businesses thought they were at the end of it, and that is not good. Some of the examples were mentioned in the video, and at the end of the day, then businesses leave the country with a bitter taste in their mouths, and I think that cannot be. We need to be more predictable. We need to be more secure, and that's why we have introduced also the compatibilities check the compatibility also in Luxembourg, where we pre-check new big industrial projects which come into the country to know right from the start whether they have a fit with Luxembourg, whether they don't exclude all our emission ceilings and water consumption and what have you, and whether they fit into our diversification strategy. But entirely with you on the imperative to cut red tape.
Yes, of course, I think that is something that everybody wants, reduce red tape. And I know when I went to a farmers' congress and they said, yeah, well, you politicians always promise to cut down red tape, but there's always a layer that is added. And I think in practice that is sometimes the case. And I prepared recently for a roundtable at the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce. I think your deputy head of office was there as well on that one. There I checked the figures on Adam. What are we looking for from the employment side? And in the March 2022, the most researched job was an IT expert. In 2023, what was it? Compliance officer. That was the most one, and that is due to all what we are imposing on our companies. And I think there is a lot that can be done. René, you said we shouldn't talk about the elections, but there might be a party that has an objective to reduce red tape in its program. So please check all those programs if you are interested.
We leave it there. We leave it there.
We leave it there. But on the other side, I think a lot could have been done better as well. We were talking about CBAM. CBAM sounds very nice and is indeed establishing inside the internal market fair competition for the products. But on the other hand, who does the administrative burden for importing? It's not, let's say, the Chinese subsidized company that is doing it. It is the European importer that has to do all the administrative burden. So even with that one that is well meant, we add a layer there as well. René, you were concerned as well about the CSDDD, all those legislation coming down the road. We are not there yet, but I think we should as well, even though that will be a huge challenge, we need to already now to look at possible solutions. And I think that it is important as well, if we want citizens to be on board for the openness of our economy, they need to see as well certain safeguards. I was talking about the deforestation regulation. We have CSDDD, we have forced labor as well coming down the road. So I think this is very important that the citizens understand and accept the openness. But nonetheless, on the other side, we need to design those that they are, as you say, digitalized by design. And as well, maybe there are new technologies, artificial intelligence, that could do eventually the job beforehand already. And this could be eventually as well an opportunity for the European industry to be there, the first mover. I think that is at least something where we should think about. And then ideally, a lot of the problems that we are trying to solve by our EU regulations and directives, I have to say, ideally, we could or should solve them at a multilateral level. But unfortunately, the WTO is at a quite poor stage of activeness due to several nominations of posts. I will not go into the details, but this is, of course, would be ideal. And then I think we have as well maybe to see a little bit on the other instruments. We need to work on what we can do effectively. And before Georges was talking about as well the competitiveness, how important it is. We have now in a record time, and I look at Calteux as well, the Commission has proposed it, and I was the rapporteur for it, the instrument on foreign subsidies. Because we have many cases in the European Union as well. There is a public tender, and there are companies, and I was in contact, for example, with Jan de Nul. They are members of FEDIL as well. They had a dredging project where they were applying for at the Elbe River in the northern Germany. They were one of the competitors. There was one Danish competitor and a French, a Dutch-Belgian consortium, and the Chinese one. Well, the Chinese was, they were all around 50 million euros for the project. The Chinese came in with 31 million. And this, with this instrument, we now can catch those cases and exclude them from the market. And the same goes for mergers and acquisitions, so for concentrations. I think those are the things where we have really to work more strongly, and there as well do our homework on what we can do to ensure that openness definitely is not a weak point but a strong point.
George, I wanted to hear you on the hydrogen project, if your experience and relate to red tape. I don't know if you want to mention it. Otherwise, I think the key word was given public markets. I think, Minister, you said it, in this room we have several companies that are performing very well on energy efficiency, that are performing very well socially, and I could add a lot of other criteria. Then we come to the public tenders, and we see that, yeah, very often it's still about the price. Now we heard that the foreign subsidy could be dealt with. It's not always about a subsidy, it's also about the fact that the standards are not simply ours and that it's quite easy for the competitor to enter. Jana, I think it's a reality for your market, surely. So who wants to react on that one, the public tenders, what has to happen to at least create the level playing field in that area, while the private markets might still run on prices? I don't know.
Maybe I can say something briefly about this. I agree that, of course, tenders, public markets are an obvious lever to implement this change that we want. If we want more sustainable, more circular products and businesses, and if we want to promote that, of course, we need to put that in our public tenders. And I think we have done that a little bit, and it's not within my ministry, but the government has been doing that to some extent, mainly on transportation, on electric vehicles and electric charging stations and so on. But we can do much more on that. I think we can definitely use these criteria to promote these new technologies and these priorities. And also, of course, in such a way not to exclude our own Luxembourgish businesses. Need to make sure that we have standards that are working also for our own companies. I know that has not always been the case, and I think we need to learn from that. We need to really put this to work. I think green procurement is a very powerful instrument which should absolutely be at the very top of the list for the incoming government.
Who else wants to elaborate on public markets? Pierre, maybe?
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe quickly 2 words. First, Mr. Minister, you mentioned transportation. Recently, the French president emphasized that one of the ways to go on what he calls European by European Act will be through a way incentivizing, for example, electric cars coming from countries in which most decarbonized countries, and obviously Western countries and European countries are amongst those. So it means that the subsidies to buy an electric vehicle in France will be more interesting and will be existing for electric vehicles coming from these countries and not mostly from China. I just want to make a point on this. If we take, for example, the Net Zero Industry Act, there is a point, an objective which is very interesting, that the EU-based manufacturing should answer a certain level of the European demand. But when you read the text, nothing. Just green and etc. But the mention of public tender and public procurements to kind of, okay, let's see what we can do under WTO and let's see how we can arrange, not in a protectionist way, but at least that the political commitment in Article 1 is broken down in Article 19 of this very act. We have nothing. And this is where, for example, from France Industrie, we incentivize, ways to draft it in order to have the EU-based industry answering not the offer objective, but demand objective in net zero technologies. And so we have the political commitment and objective in Article 1, but when it comes to public procurement, WTO, we cannot act, we cannot take action. We are very worried about what WTO could react, even though they cannot, because there is no panels at all, or functioning panel. So pragmatism, I think, sometimes is as well very important when it comes to economic. You highlight something very important: collective effort. But as well, in the collective effort, when the Net Zero Industry Act, all the acts we have on the table now are the industry is the reason of being drafted and the objective of the draft, but we have no industry inside the acts. Industry is not a stakeholder. We can invite them to give advice, but no, you don't come to the table. We, as an administration, we know how to act. So maybe if we want to make it collective, let's do it bigger, and let's enter it in a way that we can as well advise and be there as well, the EU industry base.
An important statement. George, you want to elaborate?
Yeah, maybe just briefly, because you spoke about hydrogen, which no doubt will be also needed for decarbonization. But we also know that hydrogen, let's say, production is on one hand depending on if we want green hydrogen, on renewable electricity, which we need in enormous quantities, but also on the other hand on the right technologies, on developed advanced technologies to transform water into hydrogen and oxygen. And this transformation, let's say, is currently still under development. The most modern electrolyzers have still to come on to commercial scale. And it will only be the demand which will then allow this development, and also then the reduction of costs if the demand is there. And this demand is currently not, let's say, incentivized by the legislation, also not by the renewable RED now, which was, let's say, compromised earlier. It does not comply with the targets which the Green Deal wanted to achieve.
Christophe, you just...
Maybe I just would like to rebound on the statement by Georges on hydrogen, and especially green hydrogen. And I think it is very important that we use our leverages there as well. And recently the European Commission announced, von der Leyen announced under the Global Gateway. Many of people don't know what the Global Gateway in fact is, but it is working in practice. And there we struck now an agreement with Kenya, for example, for the production of green hydrogen. I think what is very important there as well, that we make sure that in these cases it is European industry that is as well delivering the electrolyzers in this case for doing that project. And I think that is something we really have to pay attention.
Okay, I think, you want to react, and I would even add a question to you. So first, of course you can react, and then also maybe give an indication. The minister rightly said that the single market is a huge element of simplification. It's not called simplification, but imagine us exporters, importers without common European rules. So also there, we saw the discrepancies in the way member states might react if we don't have a common approach. Maybe you could also add that dimension.
Yeah, just very briefly on hydrogen. I would like to add Global Gateway is one way to push it. And the other one is the Hydrogen Bank, which the Commission announced in last year's Commission work program worth €3 billion. So also to give it a push, because it's something new, and we need the financial means to integrate it into our solutions we offer. Then on the single market distortions, yes, the single market celebrates its 30th birthday this year, so it's been there for a long, long time. It's not perfect, right? We know that, and there are many different reactions in member states when it comes to the implementation of all the rules we have, and this is also due to the fact that there are lots of directives which regulate our single market, as opposed to regulations which are directly applicable, but directives need to be transposed. So there is no one size fits all in member states, different public administrations, different governance systems. So member states, they are entitled to transpose them in a different way, which then results into the distortions of the single market. So this is something which the Commission also would like to avoid, and is also trying to avoid for a long time by guiding member states. And I think this is also a continuous effort. We're switching more and more towards regulations instead of directives. We would like to have an integrated single market, because that's the guarantee for a resilient and competitive economy. And there we need member states to be able to act on the regulation we have, so that business can have a sound framework conditions to work in. And so this is really important.
Jana, would you react on this part, knowing that, of course, your industry being affected by the energy prices, the public tender issue, the distortion within the internal market? I think you mentioned it already beforehand. I don't know if you want to add something to that. Yeah, I think just speak, it will work.
As I mentioned before, the harmonization of the energy prices in EU would help. This is important. And public tenders, so I would like, so that's maybe just one part of this question, I would like if we give incentives that all constructions, for instance, for public buildings and other, should be built with decarbonized steel. Why? This would rise up the demand, and this would help all these producers, all the companies, to speed up with their green agenda. So for me, this is an important point within this big topic. Thanks.
Great.
Just maybe one word on because Global Gateway was mentioned, and hydrogen, which I think are really interesting topics, and maybe as with my head as Minister of Development Cooperation, because I also think that's a trend that we need to be aware of and bear in mind when we talk about reindustrializing Europe. I think everybody should be aware that there is a rising will in developing countries to no longer export everything, or for instance produce just green hydrogen and then export it, put it on a ship or in a pipeline and export it to Europe, so that they can continue transforming the resources that often come from Africa or these places. I think there is more and more the strive to have their own manufacturing in the country, which is part of also of their own economic development, and maybe also of solving the problems they have in giving youth perspectives of employment, and then maybe also solving the other problems that come with it, insecurity and so on. So I think this is also a trend that is clearly there. Ukraine is a little bit the same story. They are now, of course, in a terrible situation, but when you discuss their rebuilding their economy, they talk about bringing in more processing and more manufacturing. I think this is a trend that you see everywhere. You see it in Morocco. They have plenty of renewable energy on premise. They have human resources, and you already now see, for instance, Stellantis, who is producing cars, green cars, electric cars in Tanger directly, not with green hydrogen, but directly with renewable energy. So I think we also need to bear this in mind as Europeans when we talk about reindustrializing our region.
Yeah. This gives me the keyword for the very last round, where I invite everyone to be very short. So we foresaw 2 minutes. I would try it in 1 minute, so take bullet points. It's about the orientation of the industrial policy. We had a discussion in the High Committee for Industrial Development with the ministers, several ministers. So I would ask 3 points. First of all, industrial policy, what for? So why would we need this manufacturing? Part of the answers were given. Second, here in Luxembourg, which characteristics would you see for those industries that Luxembourg should develop, attract, given some constraints maybe? And third, the instruments. Are the good old instruments, space, permit, subsidies still valid, or are there new instruments? So please do it in bullet points so that we can move to the coffee break. starting, yeah, maybe in the corner, Georges.
But the instruments, I would prefer to start with what is one of a main problem also for sure not only for our company but for others here also in Luxembourg is the manpower. We need to make sure that people, and we're speaking about industry, that young people are still interested in the industry, and therefore this is one of the initiatives which we as FEDIL are supporting, but which we have to continue to support to show the young people that they can contribute to decarbonize and to make the world better. And this is definitely something we would need, but it takes time. And as it takes time, we need to create an environment which allows us to attract the talents from abroad and keeps them also here. So the whole problem, and not going to start the details, but lodging, tax systems, and so on, to attract and to keep the people here, whilst we are doing the efforts to motivate our young people.
Pierre, maybe from your point of view, why characteristics and instruments shortly?
Well, the characteristics, if I want to focus very quickly on one point you mentioned, and maybe to echo what Mr. Minister just said, decarbonization as well, we have to use all the means on the table, meaning we spoke about a lot of, it gives me the opportunity to me to speak about energy. We speak about green, but don't forget low carbon. In France, we have low carbon energy. We can use it. And when you speak about hydrogen, the problem is not a principal project. It's a mass project. Mr. Minister, you mentioned the fact that there were those countries producing green hydrogen are building as well plants on their sites. So if you want to reindustrialize, we have as well to use what is available on the European soil. And from the French point of view, we have an asset which is nuclear. We know that it's a different way here in Luxembourg, but at least we have it. So we have as well to use all the means on the table, meaning everything that can help us and the industry to decarbonize, we have to use it, being low carbon or being green, whatever we call it. So this is an important point as well for us.
No, I think that's also an interesting dimension and important for your country, for sure. Christophe, very quickly on...
Yes, I think most innovative businesses start from a very small infrastructure. So I think what we need here in Luxembourg is a very strong support for SMEs under the European definition, what an SME means. I think this is very important. We need to unburden them when it comes to the additional red tape, for example, that they get simplified procedures under CSDDD. This is very important. Then we need stability of energy prices, of course, ideally at European level in order to be able to compete with our neighbors. And then last but not least, I think it is very important as well that we invest in the quality of the jobs that we offer, because you mentioned it, a lot of people maybe don't want to work in a classical scene industry, but they might be interested in working in a very high technological company where a lot is automized, where you need IT experts, where you need engineers, etc. I think this is the growth, the quality growth that we need for Luxembourg, and because our workforce is as expensive as it is, so in my opinion, that is the way forward.
Minister, do you share it? Do you want to add something?
No, just, yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, we need to help. We need to help our businesses, our industrial players transform. We need to adapt them to be fit for decarbonization, assisted by artificial intelligence. I think we need a strategy on artificial intelligence, which is, for me, the next industrial revolution that is upon us. And we need, of course, industry and a strong industrial fabric, because it's essential for our resilience and for the things that we need in this country.
Great, thank you. Jana, you want to add something?
Yeah, as I told already, harmonization of energy prices within EU, maybe also cap of the prices, like in France, or the discussions, in Germany, like Habeck's Industriestrom. Short permit delays, I think it works well in Luxembourg. The cooperation is quite good with the authorities. I wonder if this will work in the future, because it comes up to new technologies. Do we have already enough specialists, for instance, in hydrogen? I think this could be an issue. And then this relates to my last point, workforce. I personally believe that we will, in the upcoming years, face a big shortage of qualified workforce, and I'm really interested on listening if the politics in the next panel, they have this already on their agenda. Thanks.
Great. So workforce will, of course, come back in Jean-Louis' panel. And the Minister of Environment was glad to hear you say that we are performing not so badly in permitting. And I give you the last word.
I agree mainly with all what was said. Skills, very important. It's the European Year of Skills. So we know it's a problem. Let's address it together. There are many untapped sources, richnesses we haven't really exploited yet. We need also investment, massive investment in innovative solutions. Net Zero Industry Act fosters this, and I think Luxembourg is already really active on this. Yesterday I visited ArcelorMittal Ceratizit together with Commissioner Schmidt. It was really eye-opening to see how much Luxembourg has already done in these fields. Decarbonizing, sustainability, it's really impressive, and I think we can take this further in Luxembourg, and it would be totally in line with the European objectives. Also exploit the potential of green valleys here in Luxembourg, Luxembourg being a test bed for major European projects, so I think this is something we should explore here in Luxembourg. Also health tech. I think there will be the health tech campus inaugurated in Luxembourg very soon. It's also a very promising area. And then, yes, the support to SMEs, where many are here in Luxembourg. And today, as we speak, the Commission will adopt the SME relief package, also cutting red tape for SMEs. So this is a really important text also for Luxembourg, and I'm happy to share my thoughts with you later on that.
Thank you, Anne. So very promising announcements. I think it is a panel with the diversity we had. It allows us to see these topics from different point of views and maybe better understand them and also see some constructive ways forward. Thank you very much for your contribution, and I invite everyone to the coffee break.